is a fairly basic pump panel without a lot of electronic doodads that you're going to find on the newer ones. Most of those electronic things are going to make your life easier. We've got old rigs, so we're going to learn the old hard way, and then when you get onto a new rig, it'll be a piece of cake. Remember though, these are still in service as spares, so you know how to use them, all right? Big gauges here, master intake, master discharge, all right? When we talk about pump discharge pressure, this ultimately is going to be the gauge that reads something close to that number. It's probably going to be a little bit higher, especially when you have multiple lines flowing. Each of the individual lines is going to have its own gauge, everything except for the hose reel. It's a garbage tip. We don't really care. Do keep in mind though that your booster line, how long is it? It varies a little from rig to rig. Most of them are around 200 foot. Remember, whether you had that thing pulled out 10 feet or 100 feet, all of that 200 foot of hose is there, so you got to overcome the friction loss on it. It's 1 inch diameter hose, it's high. If you got to run the hose reel, run it up to 200. It may sound high, but that's how you're going to get some gallonage coming out the end to put out your trash fire, so you can not worry about it and get home, right? All right, master intake gauge. You see that it reads down into the vacuum scale. So 0 is atmospheric pressure. From a supplied pressure source, we should see a positive reading onto that gauge. Do you remember from testing your hydrants, what was the typical static pressure? 50, maybe higher, okay, 60, 70 in some places. If we're reading down into the vacuum, one of two things is happening. We're drafting, okay, and we're relying on atmospheric pressure to push water up into our pump because we've reduced atmospheric pressure within the pump. More on that on Wednesday. Or we're hooked up to a supply line from a pressurized source. We've outrun our supply and we're sucking our hose flat. Soft hose, you can't suction, okay? That's a case where you either got to reduce your flow or figure out what's wrong with your supply. Engine gauges, we've got a tach, which we are going to be looking at from time to time. We've also got a water temperature gauge for the coolant in the engine. We've got an oil pressure gauge. What should an oil pressure gauge read? I'll give you a clue, it's not 0, okay? If your oil pressure goes down to 0, you need to shut the engine down as soon as you can get your people out of the structure, get it shut down. If this reads 0, I'm gonna guess that the gauge isn't right. If we kill a rig out here, hey, I've done worse things. We got a water level gauge. Most of the newer rigs have the great big one on the side of the cab that you can see from several feet away. That's great. That's what allows you to get away, straighten out kinks in hose, maybe throw a ladder, set up a light or something. But you need to be paying attention to your water gauge, even if you're hooked up to a hydrant, right? Because what happens if something goes wrong in the water system and your hydrant is no longer supplying pressure to you? One of two things is going to happen. You're either going to cavitate or you're already got your tank to pump open and it will automatically release that flapper valve and start putting water to your pump. But it's going to start dropping. You need to be aware of that change. Tell your crew, lost my supply, back out. Okay? Or you could see that the water tank level is dropping, that your suction hose is flat. You got to run over here real quick and get this pulled. That's a debate for you to have with your companies. Okay? All right. Do we normally run with the tank to pump out? Yes. Because like 100% of the time, we're going to start an operation with one line off the booster tank. Okay? So one less step to make sure we've got water into the system. If you don't have this pulled out and you're not hooked up to a hydrant and you're not drafting, you're not going to get any water, and that's when you're going to start experiencing cavitation. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. All right. Tank fill. This fills the tank off of your intake. it's essentially a discharge line, okay? If you leave this, anytime that you drop your water level in your tank, you want to get it refilled. But you don't want to just having it hanging wide open, because depending upon the size of the pipe that feeds the tank, it could actually be, and how much supply you've got coming in, it could be stealing water from whatever you're trying to discharge, okay? So refill that tank, but make sure that you're maintaining adequate discharge flow and adequate pressure out of the discharges that you're using to fight the fire. This is secondary, okay? You see all of the individual discharge controls. These are all push-pulls. Over on engine 18, you're gonna see some quarter turn valves, all right? Just make sure that you are pulling the discharge control for the line you want to charge. Because if you pull a different one, especially if hose is connected up and it's still in the bed, hey, man, that's ugly, okay? And if you do actually want to get that line into operation, it's going to be a whole heck of a lot harder to try to get that charged, jumbled up hose out of your bed later. So for this rig, we've got crosslay 1, 2, and 3. Crosslay 1, 2, and 3. Just know when I have you charge one up, I'm going to say charge that one on crosslay 1. Okay? And just double check it visually. The rest of these we're probably not going to be using unless we got to hook up to some of our side outlets. All right, you notice discharge, discharge versus intake, intake. Discharges most of the time are going to be higher on the panel than your intakes, okay? Because the actual center of your pump is right about here, okay? And it's easier to get water into the pump where it's not fighting elevation, right? Okay? Especially if we're going from draft, if we got any kind of elevation hump that it's got to get over when the pump is dry, you're not going to have a lot of success. However, some of our newer rigs, I know engine 10, maybe engine 10, engine 12, you're on engine 10. Does it have some that are all kind of just in a line?
They're still dropped just a hair.
Okay.
They're still a little bit lower.
Engine 4, I know its panel on the captain's side, they all look about the same, so double check. Because the one thing that you guys are not going to do ever in your career, because I trained you, is when you want to go hook up an intake line, a 5-inch intake line, you're not going to hook it up to the 5-inch discharge over at the captain's side, right? Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. All right. Pressure relief valve. Okay. The newer rigs have electronic pressure governors on them. We'll talk about that later after you got the hang of these. It's just a crank and it goes, ooh, man, it's all the way down. Or maybe it's just stuck. Lower or higher? Lower or higher than what? It's lower or higher than whatever pressure you're pumping. So, let's say that you're wanting to pump a discharge pressure of 150 psi, okay? Let's say, and you don't know, but this thing is set for about 120 psi, okay? You don't know what the pressure it's set at, but all it's going to be is this light will not be open, and you'll get 150 pounds, well, I'm sorry. Let's say this is set higher, like 180, okay? You'll be able to pump this without a problem. This light will be off. So that means that the PRV is set higher than your pump discharge pressure. Now, I want to set it so it's the same, okay? Because what's the purpose of these pressure relief valves or the pressure governor?
To make sure that it doesn't fluctuate the pressure of the
You're not throwing a pressure spike when a line gets shut down, or when you've got water, you've been operating from tank and you've got pressurized water coming into your intake, you don't want that spike to come out on your discharge side. Because are your crews going to be happy with you? What do they do to you?
They come chase you with a holiday bar.
Yeah, or at least they're going to call you a motherfucker or something at the kitchen table. Just not buy you beer on your off days. So, we want to get this set. So, lights off I'm getting my pressure here. I'm gonna start to lower this, okay? It's a mechanical device, so the action of it is not gonna be instantaneous. There's gonna be a little bit of a lag. So you wanna go kind of slow. You're gonna go down until you may see this light come on, which is telling you that the valve is now open. You should be able to hear water is being diverted from the discharge side of the pump to the intake side of the pump. It's not something you can see, but it's something you can hear, right? And it kind of sounds like, you know, if you're in a house with thin walls and crappy plumbing, if someone flushes a toilet halfway across the house, you can hear it running, right? That's kind of the sound that you're gonna get coming from down in here. It's not gonna dump on the ground. It's not what it's designed for. It's to take the water from the discharge side, the excess pressure, and dump it back to the intake side, okay? So, that light is turned on. You hear that sound. It's open. So now we've got to get it closed again. So we're just gonna creep up on this crank until the sound stops and the light shuts off. Now, this is set for a pressure that's just a smidge higher than your intake, or than your discharge pressure, okay? Now, the question comes up, if I want to charge another line, we've got this at 150, so the valve's at 150 or so. Now I want to charge a line that's 180 PSI. First thing I'm going to do is crank this up to get it out of the way. Because if I try to run up to 180 PSI discharge pressure, what's it going to start doing? It's going to dump to the intake side of the pump. That's what it's designed for. So crank that up. I don't care how much. All right, get it out of your way. Get your second line open. Adjust your throttle and feather your original line down. Once everything is set on your individual line gauges, come over and reset this. Same process, okay? Engine 18 has the same type of control valve mover there, all right? All right, everybody remembers, hopefully, down at the bottom we have bleeders and drains, okay? This one says drain, it's actually a bleeder. Wherever it's an intake, this is my driver's side intake 1. Intake drain is a bleeder. We're going to open that as we charge it with water so that the air gets pushed out before I put a big glug of it into my pump. Alright? The ones that are drains are for the discharges. We use those anytime we want to, like when we're breaking down a hose setup, we want to bleed the pressure off. Real life story, okay? I was driving engine 4 late at night. We pull up on a house that is fully involved. Not police fully involved. I mean, for real, fully involved. Okay? And it's starting to light off the other exposures. Alright? We already had one engine there doing attack with, I don't know, the fire was laughing at it. So I tried to get into a hydrant. I got the supply up to my rig. I'm trying to put it out to him on my LDH discharge. Couldn't get the cap off. Okay? And there was water somewhere in the line. It had just enough pressure that it made getting that cap off pain. I ended up running an extra 2.5 over to that rig just to get something started. And then I found the biggest guy I could find, Dan Freeman, everybody know him? Nice guy, wouldn't want to cross him, okay? And he and I together got that cap off. What would have been easier, and I wasn't thinking about it at the time, flip open the drain to that discharge, it would have taken that water off, gotten the pressure off the cap, and it should have come off easy peasy, okay? Lost 3 houses that night. In the end, didn't make a bit of a difference. But it's the Ben Curvin Memorial Park over across from Quick and Easy on North 4th Street. Yeah. All right, any questions about the pump panel? What we're going to be doing today is we're going to go through, you can go ahead and kill that.